My name is Garnet Schulhauser, and I'm the author of two books, Dancing on a Stamp and Dancing Forever with Spirit. And my third book is being published by Ozark Mountain Publishing, and it should be released sometime in early 2016. I was born and raised in Saskatchewan in Canada, and I was raised in a very religious Roman Catholic family. And I served as an altar boy for many years and followed all the rules of the church very faithfully. And then I went to law school, and after law school, I moved to Calgary in Canada, where I practiced corporate law for, 34 years before I retired. And what happened was I met, what really transformed my life was that in 2007, I was strolling down the street one day when I was still practicing law, and all of a sudden this homeless man jumped out in front of me. And he looked like a typical homeless man. He had long, stringy hair and a scraggly beard and dirty, slept-in clothes. And I didn't go around him because he transfixed me with his gaze, because he had these amazing, sparkling, dazzling blue eyes that penetrated deep within my soul, and at the same time sent me this wave of pure, unconditional love that filled my whole body with an amazing sense of peace and security. So I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights. Not sure how long I stood there. Finally, he broke my reverie by saying, "Why are you here?" And then he promptly disappeared into a nearby store. And so when I finally collected my wits, I went into the store to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. So I went back out into the street and I walked up and down trying to find him, but he had seemingly disappeared into thin air. So the very next day, same time, I went back to the same street to try to find him. And I walked up and down without any luck for 15 or 20 minutes. Finally, I found him sitting on a bench all by himself. So I went up to him and I said, "Why did you stop me the other day, and who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm a soul just like you, and I'm here to answer your questions and help you on your journey." So then my skeptical lawyer brain kicked in, and I said to him, "Why do you think you could help me when you can't even help yourself? Because you've been sleeping on the street for weeks and you smell like a dead fish." So he just gave me a big smile and he said, "Looks can be deceiving." He said, "You look like you're a successful lawyer with everything under control, but we both know that's just a facade." He said, "You can turn around and go back to your office and see if you can find your answers in all those emails waiting for you on your computer, or you can sit down and have a chat with me." So fortunately, my intuition kicked in and it was screaming at me that I should really sit down and chat with this guy because he was someone very special. And so I did. And that was the beginning of a dialogue that went on for several months after that. And I found out that his name was Albert, and he was actually one of my spirit guides in disguise. And so he told me that I was the only one who could see him in the physical form as a homeless man. So if somebody had been walking by the street that day, they would have seen me sitting on the bench by myself. And I didn't know it at the time because I felt him and he seemed real. And of course, he looked like a real person. And I asked him why. It actually appeared that way to me for the first 3 times. And then after that, he was just a voice in my head. And we communicated by telepathy. And when I asked him why he had appeared as a homeless man, he said it was his way of easing me into the conversation. Because if he had just started talking to me as a voice in my head, I likely would have thought I was losing my mind. So it was his way of sort of getting me familiar with him and easing me into the dialogue. So anyway, our dialogue went on for several months, and he told me that he wanted me to write a book about his revelations so they'd be available to everyone. And that led to my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. Yeah, during the course of our dialogue, he gave me many startling revelations, and a lot of them flew in the face of what Christian holy men had been preaching for centuries. I mean, the main points were, he said, we're all eternal souls that live forever. We incarnated on earth by our own choice to learn and experience things that we needed for our evolution as souls. And before we incarnated, we each prepared a life plan. And in this life plan, we set out the major circumstances of our proposed new lives. Things like where we'd be born, the first language we would learn, and the identity of our parents and siblings and friends and other relatives. And we did this for a very specific purpose because we had a goal in mind about learning lessons and having certain experiences. But once we're born, we don't remember what's in our life plan. And because we have free will to act, our lives are not predetermined and we will often stray off course. But the other thing that was sort of amazing, he said, is that God, or the source, he liked to call it the source, does not control the events in our lives and doesn't make rules for us to follow. So that no matter what you do in your life, when your physical body dies, you return to the spirit side, which is where you came from, regardless of what you did, because there's no judgment or punishment after death, and there is no hell. So everyone goes back to the spirit side, no matter what you did, good or bad. The second book is about information from him, but it was in a much different fashion. In my first book, it was a dialogue by telepathy. And then after I'd finished the first manuscript, I didn't hear from him for a while. And then suddenly one night I woke up in bed and I saw this ghost-like ethereal figure standing in the doorway. And as it moved closer, I recognized it. It was my old friend Albert in his homeless man disguise, but he was in astral form. So I said to him, "Hi Albert, what brings you here this time?" And he said, "I'm going to take you on a series of astral adventures. I'm going to take you to the spirit side and to see some of the wonders of the universe. And I want you to write about them in your book," because he believed that a picture was worth 1,000 words. And so then I said to him, well, I didn't know what to expect. So I said, should I tell my wife where I'm going? Do I need a passport? He just smiled and said, "No, you'll be back in your body before the morning and she will never know you've been gone anywhere." So then he literally reached out and pulled my astral body out of my physical body, which stayed behind, still sleeping in bed. And we rose up through the clouds and up through the ceiling, and we hovered at a high spot above our planet. And he let me turn around and look at it. And from that perspective, our planet was just amazingly beautiful. It was breathtaking. It was like a jeweled pendant floating in inky blackness of space. So it was really quite amazing. So then he tugged at my sleeve and said, "Come on, we're going to the spirit side." So he led me towards a shimmering doorway. There was nothing but blackness behind it. We walked through the doorway and all of a sudden I find myself standing in this beautiful meadow. It was like the most beautiful meadow you can ever imagine. It had lush green grass, tall majestic trees, and wildflowers that were resplendent in 1,000 different colors. And the perfume wafting up from these flowers was amazing. It was almost intoxicating. It was so beautiful. So we walked through the path in the meadow. We went up a small hill. And at the top of the hill, on the other side at the bottom, I could see a group of souls waiting for me. And then as we got closer, my heart skipped a beat because I recognized them. They were my mother, my father, my brother, my grandparents, and various aunts and uncles who had already passed over from the earth plane. And then to my delight, running from behind the group towards me was my little dog, Oscar, who had passed away 10 years before. And he was running towards me with his little tail wagging his whole body. So that was a great greeting. And then I was a little apprehensive about meeting up with my mother again, not because I didn't love her dearly, but she had very strong religious convictions when she lived on earth. And my first book, Dancing on a Stamp, was not kind to the Catholic Church. I took a lot of shots at the church. And so I wondered what she would think of that. But she allayed my fears. She gave me a big hug and said, "Everything's okay." She said, "If I were still living on earth, I would not be happy about what you wrote in your book. But now that I'm on the spirit side, I can see the whole picture and I agree with everything you put in your book." So that was wonderful. So I had warm hugs with all my family members. And then Albert tugged at my sleeve again and said, "Come on, we have to go somewhere else." So he led me towards this beautiful white city gleaming in the distance. It was a city he called Aglaya. And so we entered the city through its main portal and walked down the main boulevard. And there the streets were swarming with souls dressed in many different colorful garments from many different countries and eras on earth. It was like I was in the middle of a costume ball. And Albert explained to me, he said, souls in the spirit side can appear in whatever form they want to other souls. And he says souls will often dress in the garments that they enjoyed wearing from one of their lives on earth. Hence the great diversity of different kinds of clothing and colors and everything else. And he said if they want to, they can just appear as globes of light. So it's entirely their choice. and they can change it as often as they like. But he said that no matter what their outward appearance is, they will always be easily recognizable because they all have a unique energy signature. So we will always recognize the other souls on the spirit side. So then he led me towards this very tall, majestic building with pillars lining the front that he called the Hall of Wisdom. And inside we entered a large circular chamber with a high dome ceiling. And in the middle of the room was a table in the shape of a horseshoe. And there were 11 souls seated around it. And they all had snow white hair, smooth, unblemished skin, and they wore gold robes with white sashes. And Albert explained that this was the Council of Wise Ones. And he said it was their job to oversee all the incarnations on our planet. So the chair of the council, her name was Sophia, she greeted me and said, "Thank you for coming to join this meeting." She said they wanted me to come there because they had a message for me to take back to my fellow humans. And so her message simply was this. She said, "Your civilization is at a very crucial point in its development. You've developed really advanced technology, but your emotional and spiritual intelligence has not kept pace. And all too often we let our negative emotions, like fear, anger, hate, and greed, control too much of our lives, and that often results in strife and conflict." And she said, what we really need to do is we need to discard our negative emotions and learn to fully embrace love and compassion for one another, for our planet, and for all the other animals that exist on our planet. And we need to do this before we end up destroying ourselves like some of the other civilizations in Earth's history, like Atlantis and Lemuria. And because we currently have weapons that can destroy all life on our planet, and we need to be careful that these are not unleashed and end up having us crash and burn like some of the other civilizations. And so she said, my mission was to go with Albert, and he was going to show me some things, and I was to write about him in my books, and hopefully we can help other people move up the path of spiritual enlightenment before we crash and burn. So that was the message from them. And then Albert took me to, the first stop was away from the spirit side. We left the spirit side. He took me to a beautiful water planet called Proteus. And it looked much like Earth from space, except it had no land masses. It was entirely covered in oceans. And so we dropped down through the clouds and submerged under the clear blue waters. And the sea life underneath that planet looked much like the life under the oceans of Earth. It looked very similar, coral reefs and colorful fish and plants. And Albert led me towards a large coral reef where we met up with a dolphin and a whale. And these creatures they tell me that the sea life on Earth is very similar to the sea life in Proteus, because much of the sea life on Earth was seeded, originally came from Proteus, a long time ago. And they tell me that they keep in telepathic contact with their cousins on Earth, with the dolphins and whales on Earth. And they say they don't like what they hear, because the dolphins and whales on Earth are tired of being abused by humans, being hunted and trapped and killed. And they say that the dolphins and whales on Earth are very sensitive, highly intelligent creatures who only want to live in harmony with their planet and with the other animals on their planet, including humans. And they don't know why humans continue to abuse them without justification. And they can't seem to get their message across to humans. So these two on Proteus asked me to go back to Earth and write about this in my book, so that maybe more humans would be aware of the plight of their cousins on Earth, so we can stop the abuse. And so I agreed to do that. And then Albert took me back to Earth, and he wanted to show me more examples of how humans, our race, are abusing other creatures in our planet. And so the first stop was over the Pacific Ocean near Indonesia. And there I got to watch the operations of a shark finning boat. And there I watched as dozens of sharks were reeled on board this boat. Their fins were cut off with long knives, and then the sharks, while still alive, were tossed overboard, where they would be eaten by predators or die a slow death from suffocation, because without fins they couldn't swim fast enough to get enough oxygen through their gills. It was horrible. And Albert said there's only one reason for this abuse, and that's to allow some people to enjoy shark fin soup, which is a delicacy in many countries. So then he took me to Zimbabwe in Africa. And there I watched as we hovered over a killing field where dozens of dead elephants were strewn over the terrain. They'd been killed by poachers with cyanide poison. And I watched as the poachers used chainsaws to cut off the ivory, throw it into the back of their trucks. And it was horrific to see the abuse of these majestic creatures. And I knew that was done solely to fuel the illegal trade of ivory, which was often used to make fancy trinkets for people who didn't know or didn't care how it was obtained. So that was an awful scene. Then he took me to a factory town over the south of China, and we hovered over the smokestacks. And the pollution from these smokestacks blackened the sky and choked the air. And it was horrible to see this, and not just one example of many factories that do the same thing. And Albert said that what he showed me was just a small example of the abuse that we heap on our own planet every day by polluting her rivers and lakes and her atmosphere and her soil. And then Albert said, to top it all off, our civilization is noted among civilizations in the galaxy because we not only abuse our planet and its other creatures, but we manage to abuse one another, through violence and neglect. And not only do we kill each other in wars and conflicts, but we allow some people to enjoy excessive consumption while many others suffer from starvation and disease. And he said it's really a tragedy, and it's something that we really have to try to get our act together to avoid further abuse. Yeah, it was quite a transformation for me because as a lawyer, I was very much of a straight-laced, button-down corporate lawyer. I didn't talk about spirituality or religion or anything, and so it was really quite a transformation. And after I had finished writing the manuscript, this was done at Albert's request, I struggled for a while about whether I would actually have it published because I feared adverse reactions from family, friends, former law colleagues, and clients. But after a while, I thought, I really have to do this. And if I happen to lose some friends along the way, well, so be it. And so then I decided, as my friend Sherry Cortland put it, to come out of the spiritual closet and to have my book published. And so I did. And I did lose some friends, but I gained many more new ones. So I was very happy with that decision. And I'm very happy to be Albert's messenger and write books. I really enjoy it much more than practicing law. So it was truly the right course for me to take. And my family's been very supportive. My wife's a very spiritual person, so she fully understands what I've experienced and what I'm writing about. And the rest of my family is very understanding, and they encourage me to continue to write my books. So everything's fine. And to the people who think I've gone crazy, well, they're entitled to their opinion. And there's so many others who really encourage me for doing what I'm doing. I'd like to tell you a bit further about my second book, Dancing Forever with Spirit, because I described sort of the bad things that he was showing me. And I'd like to show you that there was some really good things that are happening. He basically said, things can look pretty grim, but there's a lot of good things going on. And he said a lot of what we perceive about our world is because of the emphasis that the news media places on negative news. It just sells better. And he says there are thousands, if not millions, of kind and compassionate acts that go on every day by humans that go unnoticed because they never get reported. And he said the humans have become much more spiritually aware in the last few decades, and they're really improving their ability to curtail abuse or pollution rather, and stop abusing other animals. So we're getting better at it, but we have a ways to go. And he said that ultimately our goal is to raise our consciousness and expand our consciousness, raise our vibrations so that we can ascend to the new earth. And then to show me that there really is a light at the end of the tunnel, he actually took me to Earth in a higher dimension, which is called the New Earth. And there I met with the descendants of a civilization that had originally lived in our Earth a long time ago in Central America. And they had managed a long time ago to orchestrate a mass ascension up to the New Earth. And they did that to escape an encroaching barbarian army that was closing in on their city. So their descendants ascended to this new earth. The people living there now They live in a place that's free from violence and crime and negative emotions. They live in harmony with their planet and the other animals on our planet. They don't eat animal flesh, and they eat only liquid food made from plants. And they've learned to shield their bodies from disease, repair injured tissue, and slow down the aging process, so they live for several hundred years. So it's really an idyllic world where they're free to pursue wisdom and knowledge and enjoy the peaceful splendor of their planet. And it's a place we should all aspire to go to. For us to get there, we have to raise our vibrations enough so that we can match the vibrational rate of the new Earth. And to raise our vibrations, we have to discard our negative emotions and embrace love and compassion. And so a lot of other humans have made the ascension. It's up to us. We can all do it. It's not an easy thing to do, but clearly that's where we should go. And so, and Albert says we're actually getting a lot of help to make that transition. We're getting help from a lot of ET races that have been observing Earth for a long time. And we're getting help from the good people on the spirit side. And so we are getting a lot of help, but we really have to work hard to help ourselves. So now, after my first set of astral trips with my spirit guide, Albert, he came back later after I had finished the manuscript for my second book, and he took me on another series of trips. And these are really quite amazing. These are described in my third book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, which I said will be published early in 2016. And so there, he took me to a couple of different planets that had very different human civilizations. So it was really quite an eye-opener. It's sort of like, we think that ours is the only way to run the planet, but other people had a different view, and they ran it quite differently. One of these was a matriarchal planet where it was basically run by women. It was run very smoothly. So that was really quite amazing. And I met a lot of very interesting people on the spirit side. I got to have a meeting with Moses and Jesus and various other people that had some famous lives, some very ordinary lives, but they all had a very interesting story to tell. One of them was the goddess Athena. I got to meet one of my other spirit guides. Her name was Alina, and they all had a very interesting story to tell. Another one of them was a young man who had been born in the Gaza Strip, and he ended up working with a terrorist group, and he ended up getting killed in the war with Israel a few years ago. He had a very interesting story to tell. So it was a very interesting trip, and that's all detailed in my third book. So more adventures with Albert. Well, one of the messages that Albert gave me, and a lot of the stuff was very heavy about how we should live and how we should make the ascension to the new Earth. But he told me that at one point that I take things too seriously, and a lot of people do. He said I need to lighten up. He said, it's not that serious of a thing. You're on a journey on Earth. It's like an adventure. You should treat it as an adventure. And you know that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to take wrong turns. But it doesn't matter how many wrong turns you make. You're always going to end up back in the spirit side. And once you get there, you'll have a life review. You'll look back at at the things you did in your life, and you'll learn from your mistakes, and you'll plan your next incarnation. And so it's really it's an adventure. He says the souls in the spirit side regard life on Earth like it was a play. And if you're in a play on Earth and the script calls for you to stab and kill another actor, well, you don't get arrested by the police after the curtain goes down, because it didn't really happen. It was play acting. And so he said, on the spirit side, souls regard events on Earth like it was a play with people following scripts. And so if you get murdered on Earth, when you get back to the spirit side, you don't feel any hatred or animosity towards your perpetrator. When you both get back there, you'll just unconditionally love each other. So it's really like, on the spirit side, it's like it didn't really count. It was just an exercise you all went through, and everything's all good again once you're on the spirit side. So difficult for us to appreciate that when you're in the middle of a bad time on our planet. But you have to realize that you chose the life you have, and you did it for a reason, and you should just go with the flow and try to learn all the lessons that you can. And then when it's over, you're back on the spirit side. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel for people here, is that I'm always going to end up back at a very good place.